400 years ago, in a kingdom most history books barely mention, there lived a queen so feared that even soldiers avoided speaking her name after sunset. This wasn't a legend written by poets. This wasn't a fairy tale twisted over time. This was recorded in journals, in letters, in the whispered confessions of those who survived her reign. Her name was Queen Elowen, and she believed something very simple, that love makes a ruler weak, and fear makes them immortal. But what she didn't understand was that fear has a memory, and eventually, it remembers everything. This is her story. Elowen was not born cruel. In fact, as a child, she was quiet, observant. She grew up in stone corridors that echoed with political arguments and war discussions. Her father, King Aldrich, was known as Aldrich the Gentle. He believed in forgiveness. He lowered taxes during droughts. He opened grain reserves during winter, and the people loved him. When he walked through the capital, people bowed not because they feared him, but because they respected him. And that bothered Elowen deeply. From a young age, she noticed something. The nobles smiled at her father in public, but mocked him in private. She once overheard a duke whisper, "A kind king is a temporary king." Those words stayed with her. In her teenage years, Elowen began studying history obsessively. She didn't admire peaceful rulers. She admired conquerors, rulers who crushed rebellions before they began, queens who ruled with iron. She once told her tutor, "I would rather be feared for 100 years than loved for 10. At 16, she had already decided what kind of monarch she would become. In the winter of 1623, King Aldrich fell ill. It happened suddenly. No previous sickness, no warning. Within days, he was unable to stand. Within weeks, he was dead. Official records say it was fever. Private letters suggest something else. Poison. And although nothing was ever proven, one detail unsettled many. Elowen showed no visible grief. During the funeral procession, while the kingdom wept, she stood motionless. Not a tear, not a tremble. 3 days later, she wore the crown, and everything changed. Her first decree shocked the council. Taxes were doubled. When advisors hesitated, she said, "If they struggle, they will work harder." Within months, families began selling livestock, then land, then their children into labor contracts. When village leaders protested, she had them publicly whipped in the town square. Not privately, publicly, because she wanted the message to travel. And it did. Fear spread faster than fire. But that wasn't enough for her. She created something called the Night Watch. Secret informants placed in every town. If someone criticized the crown, they disappeared. No trial, no explanation. And soon, no one spoke at all. The event that defined her reign happened 5 years later. A small farming village refused tax payment during a brutal winter. They claimed they had nothing left. Elowen called it rebellion. 47 villagers were rounded up. Men, women, even 2 teenagers. They were locked inside a wooden church. At first, people thought it was intimidation, until soldiers began stacking firewood against the walls. Witnesses later wrote that the queen watched from horseback, calm, unblinking. When the fire started, the screaming echoed across the valley. Some soldiers turned away. Elowen didn't. And when one advisor whispered, "Your Majesty, this may be too far," she replied, "Mercy weakens a kingdom." After that night, something shifted in the air of the kingdom. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was hatred, silent, growing, waiting. Months later, an old blind woman was dragged before the throne. She had been accused of spreading whispers, saying the queen was cursed. Elowen asked her one question, "Do you fear death?" The old woman smiled and said softly, "No, but she will." The court fell silent. Before execution, the woman added, "You will beg for the same mercy you never gave." Elowen ordered her burned. But that night, for the first time, she couldn't sleep. She heard something, faint, like distant screaming. She blamed exhaustion, but the sound returned the next night, and the next, and the next. Then came the drought. Crops failed, livestock died, plague followed famine. People didn't blame weather, they blamed her. Rumors spread that God had turned against the throne. Even soldiers began deserting. Her most loyal general, Marcus Vale, started holding secret meetings. And one cold autumn night, the castle gates opened from the inside. The crowd that entered wasn't an army. It was farmers, blacksmiths, widows, People who had lost everything. They dragged her from the throne room. She screamed, not in anger, in fear, real fear. And for the first time in her life, she begged. They didn't execute her immediately. They took her to the same wooden church site, were built years earlier, and they locked her inside. History records something haunting. Witnesses said she pounded on the doors, crying, promising gold, promising reform, promising mercy. But mercy was something she had erased from memory when the fire began. The crowd didn't cheer. They watched silently, as if witnessing balance being restored. By sunrise, nothing remained but ash and smoke rising into a pale sky. Queen Elowen ruled for 12 years. Her father ruled for 30. Today, there are statues of Aldrich. There are no statues of Elowen, only ruins. History doesn't just remember power, it remembers pain, and sometimes it returns it.